So the first thing is the information about your volume and your microphone. Everyone's microphones are set on mute to begin with. Um, all of the conversation that we have at the end when Kim goes into her question and answer period, we'll do through the chat window that you should see there. The volume controls are at the top. And one thing that we found is that you may have to set the volume within that webinar control as well as within your computer. So if you're having any issues, just let us know. Um, it looks like a couple of people have raised hands. If they're technical questions, enter that question in the chat and we'll see if we can get to that right away. So like I said, the webinars are being recorded and they'll be available for everyone afterwards. The link to it will be sent to the email address that you used with your registration. Okay, so without further ado, we'll welcome you to this Alpha Tools webinars. This is the first one. It's a series of webinars that grew out of a recognition that the Alberta Land Stewardship Act has some great tools that have tremendous potential. A lot of folks in municipalities are nominally aware of them, but unclear how they might work, and especially unclear how they might work for municipalities. So the whole idea of this series is to try and fill that gap. So we're starting today with conservation easements, and I'll introduce Kim in just a second. And then we have three others, one on transfer of development credits on January 31st, one on conservation directives on February 7th, and one on conservation offsets on February 14th. And so our thanks to the Max Bell Foundation and another anonymous foundation who have supported our ability to put these on. And also, of course, thanks to our presenters, our expert presenters that agreed to be part of this. I also want to just note that this is part of a larger initiative called Community Conserve that was developed by the Mistakis Institute, the Environmental Law Center, and AUMA and AEMDC. And the idea of that initiative, which will launch in the next couple of months, is to allow Alberta municipal personnel to be able to post environmental conservation issues on a web-based forum, then vote on those priority issues, and then those four organizations will prepare project plans, whether that's for a particular research project or creation of a tool, information like this, and then post those back so municipalities can crowdsource funding those ones that they've already identified as being the key issues. So keep tuned to AUMA and AMDC. They're the communications conduit for all information on that. Okay, so without any further ado, I'll get Kim started up here. Kim's the executive director of the Legacy Land Trust Society. I'm not sure that there's many people in the country who have the breadth and depth of understanding of conservation easements as that Kim does. She's worked with them since the legislation was introduced in the mid-90s in Alberta. She's done so as a staff member, as a board member, worked with land trusts, small, large, done research and focused on biodiversity conservation, agricultural land conservation. So she's got a real range. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kim.
Thank you, Guy. I guess I can see the sound moving, so I'm going to assume you can all hear me. So I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat. If I start coughing, I'm going to hit it on mute so that I don't cough all of your ears off, so I apologize for that. Also, I really wish we were all in the same room because I can see so many names on there of people that I haven't seen in a long time, and it would be lovely to catch up. But this is what we can do when we get to bring you all together from far away, so that's great. So a little bit about Legacy Land Trust before we get too far into this. And we are the newest land trust in Alberta. We got our nonprofit society status in 2013 and then became a charitable organization in 2015. And then I came on as executive director that summer. And we're heavily pushed into existence by our community. There was a number of people that had been interested in working with land trusts, and we live on a really, we cover Mountain View County, which is on the Highway 2 corridor, and all touching jurisdictions. And it's a busy landscape, and it's hard for a lot of landowners to find organizations to work with because a lot of the properties that we work with are smaller in acreage, and we have a lot of pressure in this area. So also with great assistance from our municipality, Mountain View County, to help us get started, both with people, time, and dollars. So a huge shout out to them. As Guy said, I have worked with conservation easements since about 1996, and legislation came into Canada in 1995. And I've worked in Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta on those topics, and in all that array of areas that Guy had mentioned. So there are people who know a lot about easements, and there's lots that I don't know yet. And an hour is very short, so I should dig into it. But I think hopefully we can give you a good overview today, anyhow. So with that, the overview of today is we're going to start really basic. What is a conservation easement? Talk a little bit about where we get them from in this province. A little bit about value and compensation. This is an area, if people have sort of a basic knowledge of conservation easements and they understand them on a basic level from a land trust perspective, sometimes it gets confusing as far as how valuation and compensation works. We'll talk about where it comes from in Alberta, and then we're going to talk about conservation easements and municipalities. So I'm just wondering if people are having trouble with sound. I see Brenda and Dan's question. Dan is good. If people haven't been hearing something to this point, maybe raise your hand. Sound good? Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Odessa. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so from a basic perspective, conservation easements are a contract between two willing parties. One of those parties is a qualified organization. In Alberta, the legislation identifies the qualified organizations as the government, so that means the province can hold conservation easements. A government agency, a local government body, which means municipalities, can also hold conservation easements, and then a corporation that has as one of its objects holding land for conservation purposes. And if that organization were to wind up, that the easements would be transferred, and that's a very important part of a land trust's business, and then also that it be a registered charity. So the province, municipality, and land trusts or societies or corporations that have that objective to take care of land for conservation purposes. It gets registered on the land title so that anybody who pulls that land title can see that there is a conservation easement there. It runs with the title regardless of landowner. So over the term of the agreement, every future landowner would be bound by the agreement as it's written in the first place. In Alberta, we do have the opportunity or the option to register what you would call a term conservation easement. To my knowledge, that has not been done. Every conservation easement that I'm aware of in the province has been registered in perpetuity. And so for as long as that land has a land title, every future landowner would be bound by that agreement. The person who does enter into it does it voluntarily. And whether yeah, here comes a cough. So, so they do it voluntarily, and they do that with the qualified organization. And the base document itself is fairly consistent, and then between organizations and landowners. And then it's the list of restrictions that get discussed to make sure that they meet the objectives and the view of both the landowner and the land trust. We've always used the word negotiation on this front, and I don't know if it's as I get older, but I feel that sometimes insinuates that there's something that we're struggling on. And so I've really turned that more into discussion, and it really is just semantics. But instead of negotiation, I just call it a discussion. We're trying to achieve the landowners, particularly from a land trust perspective. We're trying to achieve the landowner's vision and aligning that with what the land trust's objectives and long-term mandate is. Another thing just to note, particularly when you get talking about conservation easements with legal folks, is the word easement generally as an instrument on title means something negative in nature, but conservation easements through the legislation allow us to put in clauses of positive things. So you can also say the landowner will do these things rather than the landowner will not do these things. And uh, you would think that that could be fairly minor, but it's not. There's a recent example in Alberta where restrictive covenant had been listed and it needed to be negative in nature, and because it wasn't, it ended up being overturned. So conservation easements can allow that positive comment. So if we consider land ownership as a bundle of rights, or in this case, we have crossed out and said opportunities. And the reason being is we've listed right to cultivate, irrigate, harvest trees, subdivide, graze, right to build. So all the things you can do when you're a landowner, but not all of those things actually are rights. So the right to irrigate, for instance, you would have to have permit to water. The right to build, you would have to make an application into your municipality. So consider land ownership a right of opportunity, rights of opportunities, a bundle of opportunities. So these are the things that you can do as a landowner. And so here they are listed again. You have a qualified organization. The landowner and the qualified organization get together, have a conversation, figure out what they want these to do, and then the pieces that the rights that the landowner is going to give up, or the things that they're going to be allowed to do, are then written up in this contractual agreement, the conservation easement, between the two parties, and they end up with a vision. So you may have given up the right to build or subdivide on a property. We might also include clauses in there about conservation grazing or harvesting of trees using a conservation plan. So that's sort of the basic how they work. So in Alberta, the ways that we can do, or what we can do conservation easements for, are for the protection, conservation, and enhancement. And the lawyer that we use for Legacy Land Trust really stresses protection, conservation, and enhancement for the environment, nature, scenic, or aesthetic values, and then as well as agricultural land. As far as I am aware, there has not been one done for the natural, scenic, or aesthetic values, but there is a possibility that there's been one. We just haven't I haven't been able to pull the easement itself or talk to the people who entered into it yet. And then if the bottom, the recreational use, open space, environmental education, research, scientific studies, are consistent with the protection, conservation, and enhancement of the top three, then those can also be named as a purpose for the conservation easement itself. And this is fairly consistent with most provinces. All the provinces in Canada except for Newfoundland have specific conservation easement legislation. They might be called a covenant or a servitude, but the basics are the same. The one difference between Alberta and most of the other provinces, except for Ontario and Alberta both name agricultural land or farmland as an option that they can use the tool with. So why do landowners do conservation easements, and do they get compensation for it? And this is a really common question when I start telling people what I do who don't really think about land on a regular basis, and I explain what an easement is, and they're like, why would anybody do that? It seems like it's going to have an impact on value or whatever. And it's true, it does and can. So first and foremost, though, for every landowner I have ever dealt with, even if they say that their reason for doing it is financial, there is a personal conservation goal that's achieved. People who have absolutely no interest in conservation are very unlikely, I think, to enter into them for the resultant tax receipt, cash payment, or whatever. In the case of municipalities, you may see situations where people don't necessarily have, maybe their conservation goals will be different because they're looking for something else out of it. But even there, I think they would choose another option, and we'll get into that in a minute here. So in a case where the conservation easement is donated outright, the landowner is eligible to receive a tax receipt. They can also participate in something called the Eco-Gift program. That's a federal program that gives beneficial tax treatment to the landowner, and they can have up to 10 years to use their tax receipt, and they get a capital gains exemption on the value of that tax receipt. So uh, not every land trust and not every landowner and not every property qualifies to go through the eco-gift program, but when they do, it can be very beneficial to the landowner. If someone were receiving a cash payment, and these have happened in Alberta, there's been some programmatic areas around the Cypress Hills. Both Ducks Unlimited and the Nature Conservancy of Canada had a conservation program to sort of buffer the park, and they were offering 20% of fair market value of the property. So it was just a flat rate. It was very consistent. People knew what they were going to get if they took the cash option. And those two organizations were able to do that because they had a foundation that was supporting the work that they were doing. The third option on the list there is called a split receipt, and this is where the landowner could receive a combination of, I said donation and cash, it should say tax receipt and cash, sorry, my typo, but they would receive a combination of a tax receipt and cash. They cannot, and that's based on the assessed value of the easement, and I'll explain that process in a moment. But they cannot receive more than 80% of that value as cash. I don't think I know a land trust at least in this country, that could ever pay up to 80%. So generally it's the reverse. For most of the split receipts I know that happen in Alberta, landowners are receiving upwards of maybe 20-25% in cash, and then the rest would be in donation. And then in some cases, a landowner has gone to the municipality and made an application for something that is maybe slightly outside of the plan. And the municipality may approve the application with the condition of a conservation easement. And so with that, because it's no longer a free and clear gift, it's not eligible for a tax receipt, but instead the landowner gets the development opportunity that they were looking for in exchange for protecting the rest of their property under a conservation easement. So CE value, and I'm going to show you a little diagram that explains this better, but all the donations that are done need to be, or the appraisals, pardon me, all the donations, all the conservation easements, when they're valued, are done by a professional appraiser. Generally, they use a before and after method. So they look at the property in advance of the conservation easement. What would the fair market value of that property be? They do that by finding comparables. So they look around at what else is sold in the area. Then they consider what the impact of those restrictions and that conservation easement generally will have on the title. And again, they do that by looking around and finding comparables. In Alberta, often they use grazing leases because you can't build or subdivide on them. So here's a diagram that helps explain that. So prior to the conservation easement being put in place, fair market value would be illustrated by this blue rectangle. After, we see the residual amount. So the impact of the conservation easement devalues the property to this point. And then the difference is the value of the conservation easement. So that would be the tax receivable value if it were a full straight out donation of that conservation easement. If there's a cash payment being made, it likely would not be that difference, right? The difference is often greater than what land trusts are capable of paying. So as I mentioned before, it would be a percentage for the cash payment. It would be a percentage of that blue diagram rather than the whole thing. The conservation easement value is what would be used to determine the percentage of the split receipt that would be paid and what would be taken as tax receipt, and then the municipal discretion, of course, again on the development allowance. So in Alberta, we've had conservation easement legislation since 1995, and at that point it was under the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act. It was moved in October of 2009 into ALSA, the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, and at that point we had a slight change to the wording. So where it says environment, if you remember back to that slide a few times ago, it used to say biodiversity, and agricultural land was added in at that point. So we've been actively using easements in Alberta for about 22 years, which is shocking since I'm sure I'm only 27 and I've worked on them that long. So anyhow, primarily they've been used by land trusts in Alberta, and increasingly we're starting to see municipalities use them. Strathcona County, who I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the future, used them very early on. Other municipalities in the province, really, I would say probably in the last well, time seems to be flying, maybe 5 to 10 years. Um, Mostly, if not all of them, as far as I'm aware, have been used for the environmental or the biodiversity, the original wording, or the environmental purposes. And they're used across Canada and throughout the world. So they're not a new tool. We can learn from other areas, but at the same time, we're starting to build a pretty good history here too. So how municipalities can use conservation easements. So the example I gave in the valuation portion relates to this first point, a condition of development approval. Another would be to actually help deliver municipal plans. So if they're, and these are where some of the examples are coming in. So if a municipality had decided that a specific area was in need of some level of long-term protection, they could put a conservation easement program into play. So the first one there, purchase of CE program. There are a number of these in the U.S. In particular, in Maryland, they called PACE, Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easements, and so they have done their municipal map and highlighted areas that are going to be in protection for, they will stay in agriculture long term, and then the landowners have an option to sell a conservation easement to the municipality. In that situation, they have a set price for what they're going to buy them at. They also use other tools, so they also have an equivalent of a transfer of development credit program, but that's one of the options that they have. And then cluster subdivision, that could either be a development application or it could be a municipal plan. So a landowner comes forward or a developer comes forward and says, we want to this area is allowed to have X number of yard sites or buildings. We want to pull them all together into one area. Can we do that? So it may be a condition, or they may have put it forward in their application and we'll put a conservation easement on the rest. A place where those could be used is I believe it's in Nehill, just outside of Mountain View, to the east of Olds. It's I can't remember the name of it, but they've got a riding arena for horses, and then people have houses around it. There's probably many people on the call who know this example better than I'm going to describe it, but and then there's riding trails throughout. So what they could have done in that was said, okay, yeah, we can move all that building opportunity to the clustered location. You can have your horse infrastructure, and then we'll put in a conservation easement on the rest to protect that landscape, but still allow trail riding through for the horses. Also can be used to backstop a transfer of development credit program. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because there's a webinar on January 31st, and I'm pretty sure many of you are already registered for that. But once the development opportunity is removed from the TDC's conservation area, a conservation easement would be registered in its place. In that circumstance, there also wouldn't be a tax receipt or anything. It's not a donation, right? They get paid instead for the development potential that's being removed from there. Most of the Alberta examples to date have been as a result of a condition of a development approval. So municipalities and land trusts, where both organizations are eligible to hold conservation easements, land trusts have it as their mandate to do it. So much of the work that land trusts do is really targeted at putting conservation into place, and conservation easements are one of the main tools. And so it's very much a focus of the work. And so that's what we're land trusts are going out to deliver on their mandate. Municipalities that would use them, municipalities have a whole bunch of more other things and important aspects of their business, and so this would be a part of what a municipality would do. And I'm going to show you a table and a couple of slides that compares conservation easements that land trusts would do and municipalities would do. Both very valid, and so great opportunity for both organizations to use them. They would just be used from a municipal perspective to deliver on plans that support sort of the other broader purposes of the municipalities' work. When the purposes match, there are opportunities for land trusts and municipalities to work together. And I'll be really honest. When I started working in the land trust world, in the private land conservation world, we didn't pay a whole bunch of attention to what was happening municipally. And I think that was a shortcoming on the land trust perspective, because there are often quite a lot of places where the purposes do match. So I do recommend to, as any land trust that'll ask, that it's always a good idea to have some contacts at the municipality. Make yourself aware all their land use bylaws and MDPs are online, so make yourself aware of what they are, and have some, and figure out where there is consistency. It should be noted that in Alberta, when land trusts do go to register a conservation easement, notice is required to go out to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, as well as the local municipality. If there's not a local municipality, it also needs to go to Municipal Affairs. But it is just notice. There's no, they can't say no specifically, but they can bring up concerns. So I think regardless of where you work, our land trust at Legacy, we work fairly closely with Mountain View County. But if you are in an area where maybe as a land trust you don't work closely with the municipality on a regular basis, even in advance of getting to notice, it's always a good idea to share that. And as a municipality, if you are familiar with land trusts working in your area and you haven't had an outreach from them, go the other way. So there are, I've given 3 examples here. The MD of Foothills was instrumental in starting the Foothills Land Trust that works in their municipality. Mountain View County was instrumental in starting Legacy Land Trust. The MD of Bighorn has not started a land trust, but they have a policy called the Transfer of Subdivision Density in their small holdings agriculture zone, and if people are to do the subdivision density transfer, then they do need to work with a land trust. So there is recognition in many of the municipalities in the province, but these 3 have direct links or have supported the beginning, or are requiring a land trust to come in and work on their landscape in certain circumstances. So there, we do have a good history in Alberta, and I think a really good potential moving forward to continue efforts of matching conservation objectives together. So a municipality could have its own conservation easement program. They could write their own easements. They are qualified organizations, so they're able to accept donated easements. They can purchase conservation easements. They can make them in a request for exchange for a development change or application allowance. So they can work very much like a land trust in that perspective. They need to be really clear. They need to have a really clear objective in where they would enter into conservation easements, I think, particularly if a conservation easement program is designed. It could be reactionary, and I'm going to talk about like the way land trusts work is landowners come to us and say, can I give you a conservation easement, or could you buy a conservation easement, however that's going to work. And we see that whether it fits our mandate, or we develop plans, we go out, we talk to landowners that are in specific areas. I think municipalities need to do a similar thing. They need to have a really clear objective and design as to why they would do a conservation easement program, so that they have reasons to say no when it doesn't fit, or it's just not the right timing, but also so that it identifies and allows people to come forward to them if they need. And then it also needs to be supported by science and policy. One of the main things I hear from particularly councillors is that they're not allowed to tie the hands of future councils, which is valid. However, kind of every decision has an impact on the future. So if you are going to enter into a conservation easement program as a municipality, ensure that you have good reason, both in science and policy, that supports that clear objective of what you're trying to achieve. And the 4th point there about a stewardship plan and program is so key. As land trusts, because our bread and butter is charity, right? People believe in what we're doing. They provide us funds. They funds, but land, volunteers. So we need to make sure that long term we are doing the very best we can for that land, that we are meeting those objectives. The same is true of a municipality. And uh, in some ways, it can be very easy for a municipality to have a great stewardship plan because they all have agricultural staff who are out on the land already doing weed inspections and out there working on extension programs with landowners. So you have people as municipalities on the ground, but you, in advance of entering into or designing any conservation easement program, you have to make sure that there is dedicated time and dollars towards how you're going to take care of the conservation easements into the future and how they're going to meet their objectives. So 2 examples I provided. Strathcona County is one that felt, I don't know, this must have been, Brenda's on there, maybe she can type me an answer. When did it start? I would say like 97, 98. And it was in response to feeling that uh, the environment, thanks Brenda, was the environmental reserves were not really designed to help them protect upland that was related to so much of the ecological health of the Beaver Hills area. And so they entered into conservation easements with landowners who were coming forward to make development applications or subdivision applications on their property. So the upland portions of the properties would also be protected. And I don't believe the program is super active at this point, but maybe it's coming back to some level. And then Boulder County, Colorado is another example that I had an opportunity to go down and take a look at when I worked with Mistakis and we were entering into the early days of the transfer development credit research. And Boulder County is highly planned, and they decided to put almost a green ring. What do you call those? Somebody put that on there. Toronto has one. Greenbelt around Boulder City, and they have a number of conservation programming. So there's land trusts that work in the area in that zone. There's transfer development credit programs, and they have a conservation easement purchase program. And so that's another area where they've basically enabled themselves with all the tools that they need to be able to work with the landowners to ensure that they have this green area. Regardless of whether it's a green belt or not is kind of neither here nor there, but it's just that that's the zone or the area that they've decided that they will enter into different conservation practices. So thankfully you're all sitting close to your computer at this point and not in a large room with this on a big screen because you wouldn't be able to see it very well. But just a bit of a summary as to of what I've already had to say. So organizational mandate between a land trust and a municipality are slightly different, right? A land trust is very focused on ensuring, well, that's their whole objective. That's the mandate. That's what they do. Versus a municipality has a broader purpose. Conservation purposes mimicked as well. So program-based really more in a municipality. What are you trying to achieve? What are the objectives? Thank you, Odessa. and what are you trying to get out of the conservation aspects of it? And then the parties to the agreement, the qualified organization in the land trust case is the land trust, the qualified organization in the case of the municipality is the municipality, the landowner is your voluntary partner in there, entering into this conservation easement. Trust is an interesting one, and you know, there's really no black or white answer, clear, easy thing here because credibility given to a land trust based on their whole objective is conservation, so it just makes sense that they would do conservation easements. But there can be cynicism on private interest and the stability of that organization. Us at Legacy as a brand new organization, we've certainly received questions like that. So what are you doing to make sure that you're going to actually be there to take care of a property forever? And then, you know, the same thing kind of happens on the municipal side. Well, what about politicians changing their minds into the future? So there's that. And even within the land trust, you know, some people feel that they want to work with a local organization like us. Others want to work with a larger organization that they feel might have more stability to it, more finances, more dollars. Benefits to the landowner to work with either one of those organizations is there. Tax receipt split receipt cash payments potentially when working with a land trust. A little bit broader potential with the municipality in case it is for development considerations that we're looking at. Conservation planning, I've already talked about earlier. CEs in the development planning world on the land trust side, unless the land trust is working very clear, like very directly with the land trust, like the municipality is working very directly with the land trust, the CE program likely has very little to do with development planning, versus with the municipality is often it's to help deliver both. Eco-gift in both, as long as they're perpetual conservation easements, and then the restriction list can often be more specific with the municipality, and can be more broad with the land trust. But again, that depends on the goals and the objective of the program. So this is just a helpful reference for you guys for after. General applications of conservation easements, regardless of whether it's with a municipality or with a land trust, is the development of conservation areas. So there may be an area that is important to a local community to protect from a municipality perspective, or a land trust. Might be a biodiversity hotspot. So the example I gave earlier around Cypress Hills being an important biodiversity area, Waterton area down in the south where the Nature Conservancy's done a significant amount of work. Lot of the large landscapes along the eastern slopes where salts tends to do a lot of work there as well. So large conservation areas. CEs may also play a role in creating corridors. The landscape that our organization works in is fairly fragmented. We still have a lot of river areas that go through it, lots of natural pieces, but we tend to use our applications more to try and join conservation areas together from a corridor perspective. You may use conservation easements as buffers. So you have an important area and we've got some level of development coming at it. You might want to put a conservation easement in. And this is often a case where conservation easements for agriculture may get applied. They can also be done in and of their own right, but there are opportunities here for them to be used for that as well. And then conservation easements can also be used to anchor other programs. In Alberta, we've tend to use them to date very consistently, and I think that was in the description of the of this webinar, in that we've been very biodiversity, environmental focused, and very much around the conservation area model, getting more into corridors, less so with buffers. We're not really using them as anchors or backstops for other programming yet, but we certainly can. So there is a fair amount of flexibility in a conservation easement tool. The structure of the document, the legislation that supports it is very consistent, and it should be there so that we make sure that they last into perpetuity. But I think that there is more opportunity to use them in more places and by more qualified organizations as we go forward. So some examples: transfer development credits as the backstop. I've already mentioned that, and again, there's another webinar on this on January 31st. But then conservation offsets too. So we do have legislation through ALSA in Alberta to implement conservation offset programs. We've been talking about it for a pretty long time, and actually I'll put payment for ecosystem services into this conversation too. So if there are offsets made on a natural piece of property in exchange for a development application or action somewhere else, a conservation easement could be used to put on that property to ensure that it continues to, thank you for the date, Guy. Oh, and Valentine's Day too, nice. So conservation easements could be used as, once the offset has been used, put a conservation easement there to ensure that that property continues to provide the ecosystem services that that offset is compensating for. And then same for payment for ecosystem services programs. If we were to have some sort of biodiversity credit or program that would clean water, clean air, you know, the ecosystem services type stuff, which is a whole definitely a day-long webinar away from this, but you can use conservation easements as a backstop for that, and then also for grass banking. There's a number of examples of grass banking in the US. There's one in Canada, or in Alberta, pardon me, that I'm aware of, and that's the Sandstone Ranch that Alberta Conservation Association, Alberta Fish and Game Association, and the Nature Conservancy have worked with. So in that case, people have access. They work with a grazing association who accesses grass that those organizations own, and then in exchange for various actions, they actually, I'm not even sure if the Sandstone one uses conservation easements necessarily. I know they can use it to get credits. I think we have Craig Harding with NCC on the call, so he may have some background on that. But what can be done is that they put conservation easements in place and then have access into that grass on their own. And we can talk about that again. But anyways, we are at 45 minutes, so I think it's question time, and that was my last slide. So if you do have any questions after the fact, by all means, email, give me a call. I'm generally always available. There's also a website here, www.ce-alberta.ca, that was done by the Mistakis Institute and the Environmental Law Center with funding from, I'm going to miss somebody if I say it, so I probably shouldn't, but the Land Use Secretariat, Alberta Real Estate Foundation, Ducks Unlimited, and it's a fantastic resource. I say that with full disclosure that I am a partial author on it, but it's done in a question and answer format, and it's a great resource that I think people should definitely take advantage of. So we'll open it for questions. Okay, so Guy, how do you want me to do this? Do you want me to just answer the questions as they're written here?
Sure, I think that makes sense. We've got about 15 minutes to do questions, so
Okay,
why don't you just take them in order? And like you said, if we don't have
okay.
enough time, then we can they can email you, hunt you down later.
Yeah, okay. So I think Brenda had a question up above. Was there anybody else?
No,
I don't think so. So okay, so Brenda's question was, do you have an example of developers receiving a tax receipt? I don't. I have not worked directly with a developer and entering into a conservation easement, and theirs is slightly different because of generally it's, what's that called, Guy? Come back on. Capital land, and actually maybe Robert Orland, who's also on the call, has
in,
more experience with that. Sorry, go ahead, Guy.
inventory lands.
Inventory lands, thank you. And so it's a slightly different process that they go through. So I'm not aware, although I'm certain that they have happened. Yeah, thanks, Robert. Okay, then the next question is Robert McKay. Do you have any examples where Alberta municipal government acts environmental and municipal reserve has been used to complement CEs? That's a really good question. I've seen the reverse, where CEs have been used to complement the other. I don't see why it couldn't be done. I mean, they do have slightly different purposes for why they exist. Your environmental reserve is generally things that are undevelopable, and oh, okay, so Brenda just responds, Strathcona County applies them that way. So your environmental reserve would have been done, Brenda, to take to conserve the water in the undevelopable lands, and then conservation easements used to supplement that. So that would probably be the best example, Robert. And then Craig answered my question about grass banking. So NCC and grass banking, individuals apply for the use of the grass bank in exchange for conservation initiatives so conservation actions rather than entering into an easement on their own properties. Thanks for the clarification, Craig. There are examples of grass banks in the US where to access the grass bank, you have a conservation easement on your own property. Okay, so then Brenda said also in combination with MR. Sandy Bruce says, eco-gifts status virtually assures CRA acceptance of the appraised value. If this status is not granted or not applied for, how does the CRA respond? So in that case, like, so if you don't go for an eco-gift, Sandy, I think that's what you're asking. So if you enter into a conservation easement, you just accept a regular tax receipt. CRA may deal with that tax receipt in any manner. The reason that one of the main reasons that eco gifts came into play was for that assurance, because once, for people who don't know, once a conservation easement appraisal is accepted by the eco gift program, then CRA says good, check mark. They won't come back and audit it. They won't come back and check on it. They've agreed that because the eco gift review panel has said this is the value, that's the value. So it's not, I mean, there's no guarantee that without eco gift that CRA would come and look at a tax receipt. The reason that originally happened was because there were a number of very large tax receipts in Alberta, and CRA's red flag went up and said, "Holy smokes, let's go in and take a look at these," and that's what triggered kind of the eco gift, because they were all valid. There was nothing wrong with them, but it put those landowners in really uncomfortable places, and not great financial circumstances initially when it went into play. So that was a problem. Now, having said that, because one of the downsides to some organizations on the eco gift side is there's some uncertainty around something called change of use. And so if there were a change of use in a conservation easement, and a change of use is not well defined in the conservation easement world, there is the potential for a tax receipt or a tax clawback. And so there is some risk, I guess, not going eco-gift, but if there is allowances within the if there's some allowances within the easement for some change, it could trigger that. So there are some concerns on both sides. Good reasons on both. Conservation easement in the new MGA. Is that the conservation reserve, Lori, that you're referring to? I'll let you respond, and I'll go to Guy's question, which was, can you speak to how simple a conservation easement? Yeah, yes, of course, Guy. So when a municipality enters into a conservation easement, it can be really simple. So you have to always look at the purpose of why the conservation easement is going to be used. And the first kind of simple is the better way. So if you if not building, identify what your risk is to what you're trying to protect. So if your conservation easement is to protect basically the land in the state that it is, and the worst impact on that would be adding more people to it, maybe all you need to do is just like restrict subdivision and building. And so if a municipality, if that's the purpose, a municipal CE could be that simple. It could just say no subdivision, no building. Well, those are two things that the municipality tracks all the time. So when you're looking at what from a monitoring it down the road, that's your stewardship side of it. Has anybody come in to apply for subdivision? Has anybody come in to apply for building? No. And then in your travels with people out there, you can just ensure that that's not happening. So a CE from a municipality can be pretty straightforward, pending what the goals and objectives of the program are. And Lori, yeah, okay, so the conservation reserve, yeah, so that's another tool that municipalities now have that they can do. And Guy has done a little bit of background review on the conservation reserve, so if he wants to jump in, we'll let him speak.
Sure,
to
I'll give you a quick answer, and also note that we're thinking about doing another webinar just specifically on conservation reserves at some point. So I'd like to know if folks would find that valuable. But the conservation reserve, which, like you noted, sits in the Municipal Government Act, is constructed just like other reserves in the sense that it's land that the municipality can take at the time of subdivision, like an environmental reserve or a municipal reserve. But in this case, it's for environmental purposes. It goes hand in hand with the new purpose of municipalities now, including environmental stewardship as one of those high-level purposes. The challenge is that it requires payment of full fair market value to the developer for any land that's taken. So there's some sort of significant challenges with it, but it's quite a distinct tool from conservation easements, which sit in the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, which municipalities have access to.
Looks like people want to know more, Guy. Yep. So any other questions on easements? Anything else that, Guy, you thought maybe would be covered or?
Yeah, I'll throw in a couple of things. One question that often Kim and I have received around the use of conservation easements by municipalities is the ability of a municipality to require a conservation easement. And
Hmm.
it's not really the case that a municipality can force the placement of a conservation easement. It tends to be more in that negotiation around the approval, trying to, on the side of the proponent, make the case that this is a good thing to do, and we would place a conservation easement. So it is a bit of a negotiation in that case.
Dance.
Um, and then
A bit of a dance.
yeah, a bit of a dance exactly. Um, and what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, you mentioned salts, and just for those who don't know, I was going to note that that's the Southern Alberta Land Trust Society. Um,
Thank you.
and
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Guy.
Just one other thing I wanted to mention is one of the other projects under this Community Conserve large program that we're going to be putting together with Kim's help is a conservation easement best practices guide for municipalities. So they'll speak to where in the planning process, what kind of policy, the financial considerations, the administration considerations, and so
And I just wanted to, further support Guy's comment about a municipality requiring conservation easements are voluntary by both. So the landowner is voluntarily saying, yeah, I'll do this for, and this other stuff is happening. Brenda added another question. Are CEs used for historic and cultural land conservation? So one of the mandates of legacy land trust, this is actually a question, Brenda, we're spending a lot of time on. One of our mandates is the protection of heritage and historical properties. And no, it's not one of the purposes of conservation easements as they stand today. If the property has some level of natural landscape around it and there was also historical value, then you could certainly name those values, the historical and cultural values of the property in doing the environmental piece. For example, we've got some land in Mountain View County that has petroglyphs and a buffalo jump, and it's all native prairie around it. So the, the easement would be done from the perspective of the native prairie, but the protected at the same time would be the petroglyphs and the buffalo jump. Um, there is quite a bit of interest on the historic and the heritage cultural community right now. In fact, we have a board member on Legacy Land Trust who's also involved on the heritage side of trying to figure out how they could use a conservation easement type tool. And we would, we're engaging in those conversations and we'll continue to work on it. And yeah, Robert, that's exactly the conversation that's happening. There is some challenge too, like buildings as well, which they can do with heritage designations, but we also have some pretty big limitations and challenges with that as well. So being worked on. If people are interested, get in touch with me and we'll chat some more. Candace says the Appraisal Institute of Canada and accredited appraisers typically value real property, conventional or historic considerations at highest best use with little valuation. Yes, that's true. Is Mistakis or GOA making progress on the appraisal or the land valuation side of the equation? So I'm not sure. No, I don't know that there's a lot of work necessarily going along that way. One of the issues is that land is traded in a fair market value world. That's the market that it goes in. Um, and so when it comes to the tax receipt, um, that's the valuation that it fits in that devaluation. There definitely is lots of conversation about the value of ecosystem services, um, not specifically to valuing conservation easements, though, that I am aware of. And then we've got another, does ELSA work in a similar capacity as conservation authorities in Ontario? I do not think that that is the case. I'm not as familiar with conservation authorities, but ELSA is it's quite a large act. It overarches all legislation in Alberta, but two pieces, and um, it. I'm going to let Guy speak to that because he just sent me a note that said presenter. Go ahead, Guy.
Um, when I saw that question, my first thought was, I wish. No, we don't have the conservation authority kind of structure in Alberta, and ALSA does create a number of conservation and stewardship tools that are supposed to provide um, conservation and stewardship within the context of the regional planning, which is the main thing that the Alberta Land Stewardship Act is set up for. So it doesn't create any structural bodies like conservation authorities or endow other bodies with particular capacities that the conservation authorities have. We may see some mid-level structures within the way planning plays out over the next several years, especially with the changes in our Municipal Government Act, but not with a specific focus on conservation like the conservation.
Yeah, it was a way clearer answer than where I was going. Thanks, Guy.
Well, it looks like we might be done questions,
Okay.
and that's perfect timing. It's 10:59. Kim, are there any final words that you want to throw in?
No, just thank you to everybody for attending, and I hope that you got something helpful out of that. And as I said, if you do have any follow-up stuff, please
And
let me
like we
know.
said, it's all been
Thanks, Kelly.
recorded, and
Thanks, Candace.
the link, if this webinar platform works as we anticipate it will, but we're new to it, you should be getting a link that tells you where you can click to get the actual webinar and hear it. And like I said, there are other webinars in the series. The next one coming up is the next one coming up is mine, the transfer development credits on Tuesday, January 31st. So thanks everybody, and hopefully we'll hear from you again in future webinars.